Hungry Night is a game that has been praised beyond belief within the gaming community, and for good reason. The title is pretty much synonymous with quality to many for a multiplicity of reasons. From the animation to the combat to the world scale, there are so many attributes that this game possesses that contribute to its astounding quality. There is even a smaller indie game known as Hollow Knight that shares many of these qualities. Unfortunately for me though, there are already a bunch of YouTubers who have pretty much said everything there is to say about the game. Despite this though, I've decided to throw my hat into the ring. So let's go ahead and discuss Hollow Knight. I wanted to talk about this because it's not something I often find people discussing in video games, save for a passing mention. The atmosphere of Hollow Knight is pretty gloomy overall, but at the same time, different areas have feelings unique to those places. Right when you start up the game, you are met with an atmosphere that pretty much captures that of the overall game. King's Pass feels like gloom with a glimmer of hope, this being seen in small things throughout the area such as lifeblood and even the small geodeposits. You then venture into the hub of the world, known as Dirtmount. Initially, the area is deserted with the exception only of ELDERBUG. Although you can slowly populate the town as you progress throughout the game, it always feels like to me that this is what remained after some sort of war. But the bug equivalent of that. Who knows, maybe they got raided. Venturing to the right, you find the entrance to the Kingdom of Hallownest, and your real journey begins. Forgotten Crossroads is an area fairly similar to King's Pass in terms of atmosphere to me, except there's not as much hope. Eerily similar to my own life. Hi, yeah, is that YouTube? Yes, I made the relatable joke. Can I have subscriber now? Moving on to Green Path, along with the gloom of the previous areas, there's now almost a sense of control within the immense greenery of the area. I say this as the greenery seems to be opposite from the Queen's Garden. The greenery of Queen's Garden seems to be untamed, at least as such in comparison to Green Path. I suppose this does make sense though, seeing as though this creature right here, seems to have some sort of power over Green Path. Although this power seems to be one that has been diminishing due to the infection spreading across Hallownest. Green Path and Queen's Garden aren't super close to one another in all honesty, but I felt like a comparison between the two would be enjoyable. Next up is Fog Canyon. It has a bunch of Metroids floating around that blow up.
Oh mein Gott!
But other than that, to me, this place kind of gives off an atmosphere of mystery. This comes from the fog within the area, which, while not covering the screen to the point of which it will impair your ability to see what's going on, is enough to keep you wondering what's on the next screen. More so if it's your first time venturing into the area. The Resting Grounds is a spiritual sanctuary with statues representative of the three dreamers, as well as actual spirits of dead people. These spirits are guarded by another spirit who is really bad at her job. You can actually kill every single spirit, taking their essence, and then kill her. It's very messed up, but you can do it. Crystal Peaks is a mining operation that any large country wishes they could match. What set the feel of this particular area for me was not the visuals, but an encounter, or rather, multiple encounters with an NPC. When you first enter Crystal Peaks, you can probably hear some singing. Without much effort, you can find the source of this music, a miner bug named MYLA. She's looking for something valuable hidden deep within the crystals of the area. After you progress a bit in the game and check back up on her though, you find that she's no longer singing. It seems as though something has begun to overtake her, and she even has thoughts of killing the knight. When you have progressed even further into the game, MYLA is fully overtaken by the infection. She becomes another mindless enemy and lets out a cry if you choose to kill her. This, to me, sets the feel of this area more than anything else. It's a place that if you spend too long in, you'll give in to the madness that has taken over almost the entirety of Hallownest. Although it's obvious that this won't be affecting the knight, there's no shaking the feeling that something is amiss. This possibly having a link to the crystals within the area. Moving on to the fungal wastes, it's very mushroom. There's not much else to say really, it just feels like the air is full of mushroom spores. This is the case except for where the Mantis tribe resides. It's a really nice place honestly. I'm surprised it never got its own episode on Bug TV Cribs.
Hey, face ache!
Along the same vein, the hive is very bee. It feels very closed off, but I'm pretty sure this is something that lines up with the lore. As far as I'm aware, the bees closed themselves off from the rest of Hallownest in response to the arrival of the Pale King. Kingdom's Edge feels to me like uncertainty. There's a calm visual atmosphere, but this is contrasted with hostile creatures such as the primal aspids and hopper variants. The Colosseum of Fools, which is located in Kingdom's Edge, has a feeling of death. Right from the moment you enter the skeleton that the Colosseum is located in, you immediately get the idea that people die here. The Lord Fool is also dead, but nobody seems to care. The City of Tears is, of course, a city. One that of which is not only named by a kid going through a phase, but is also populated with the mindless bugs that have resided there for an uncertain amount of time. There's a constant rain coming from the lake above, which can make for both a somewhat depressing atmosphere, but also a place that has some amazing scenery. It's very nice to immerse yourself in the area and get lost in it. Some of the rooms in this area are also quite telling about the residents of this city. It seems as though they had become comfortable with what luxuries they had, possibly falling to the infection as a result. That is just an inference though, so don't take it as fact. The Soul Sanctum is strangely uninteresting to me. I mean, it just has a bunch of bugs who can control the power of soul. Yeah, you might have the ability to control soul and all, but we have Shrek Obama. So who's the real winner here? The Royal Waterways is an area that I have mixed feelings about. On one hand, there's an amazing atmosphere that fits well with the name of the area, but on the other hand, there's a bunch of lackluster enemies. This isn't to say that the enemies have bad designs, but rather their attack patterns are very uninteresting. Many of these quote-unquote attack patterns are just that of the enemies running towards the player. I'm aware this is something many enemies have in common throughout the game, but it seems to be most prevalent in this area specifically. Other than the bosses and the really cool dingy atmosphere of the area, I found this place to be fairly forgettable. In fact, and you may be able to tell this because of the difference in how my mic sounds, this part of the video was put in post. This is simply just because I forgot that this area existed. I think I find that fact more entertaining than it should be, but in all honesty, it's the only reason that I brought about the existence of the enemies in this area at all. Anyway, next area. The Ancient Basin is visually the darkest area in the game. It feels like the remnants of a fallen society to me. This being shown through subtle details within the area, such as, weirdly enough, the floor and a fountain of the Pale King. The Abyss, which is contained within the Ancient Basin, is the embodiment of void. It's full of both siblings and the shells of failed vessels. It's interesting to see what implications this area has for the lore of this world, being the birthplace of the vessels and the location in which members of a supposed ancient civilization base themselves. I don't really know what to say about Deep Nest. It's creepy, there's spider, moving on.
Ubu, Parima!
As you've probably already noticed, this game looks amazing. I love the contrast between the background and the foreground that creates a natural looking environment, one of which has characters and enemies that pop out from it. This, while seeming like something that's pretty negligible at first, it's a concept that really does benefit the game's art style in the sense that it makes it much more unique and recognizable. The fine lining of the background in contrast to characters and enemies who are all made up of confident, thick brushstrokes creates an extremely distinct world that's really pleasing to the eye. Hey, remember when I mentioned Hungry Knight before? Well, that's a game. In fact, it's the first game that the developers of Hollow Knight Team Cherry made together.
¿Quieres?
This game starred the Knight, or at least a character that looks a lot like the Knight. The objective is to defeat 3 masked entities to bring your friend back. You do so while collecting cherries every 10 seconds to stay alive. These cherries are actually where Team Cherry got their name. So yeah, this Knight and this Knight look the same. This of course means that Hungry Knight is the prequel to Hollow Knight. This is something you should absolutely take as fact and not question in the slightest. That's right, move over. What good prequel games are there? Yoshi's Island. When comparing Hungry Knight and Hollow Knight, you can definitely see how the two games are similar. From the way the knight looks, to its walk cycle, to its attacks, there are even 3 dreamers in a sense. Even one of the enemies in Hungry Knight I could see being part of Hollow Knight if their design was updated a bit and their attack was made more interesting. Moving back to Hollow Knight, the animation is amazing. Everything is so smooth and every single animation for every single character works in tandem with the gameplay to some degree. Unless of course they're an NPC. The swing of the knight's nail only takes up 1 frame so as to make the controls tighter. Every enemy who has an attack has their own animation that precedes that attack to telegraph that they're about to strike. I know this is something very common in video games so as to give the player time to react, but it just looks so good. I'm pretty sure there's even a name for this signal animation, but I can't remember it. Google won't even tell me. And for this reason, I will be suing Bethesda for a box of mozzarella sticks. My future lawsuit aside, Ari Gibson, the art director of Hollow Knight, has obviously put a tremendous amount of effort into making the style of the game unique, and there's really no denying that he's achieved this. Okay, there are a lot of bosses in Hollow Knight, so I'm going to be speeding through quite a few of them so that I can get to the ones I really want to discuss. Brooding Malwick, or, what's that? Brooding Malwick. Brooding Malwick. This guy, it looks like he doesn't keep up with his dental hygiene, 2 out of 10. Crystal Guardian, Crystal Head got to this man in an unforeseen way, 5 out of 10. False Knight, a fake knight, I'm surprised that he hasn't been cancelled yet, 4 out of 10. Flukemarm, alluring, 5 out of 10. The Watcher Knights, me and the boys got brought back to life by the infection, only to die again, 6 out of 10. Vengefly King, just really boring. 2 out of 10. Soul Warrior, he should try to get a fencing scholarship because he's certainly not that good at using soul, 3 out of 10. Umu, Electric Metroid, 5 out of 10. Oblobbles, I just can't shake the feeling that these guys are somehow connected to Big Yoshi, 3 out of 10. Hive Knight, B-movie joke, 3 out of 10. Gruz Mother, she gives birth when she dies, what can I say, 3 out of 10. Brothers Oro and Mato, this sort of felt like a Mantis Lord's boss fight spin-off to me. It's not bad, but it's not super interesting to me other than the fact that they look into each other's eyes all anime style as if they're about to defeat the knight. Joke's on them though, that only happened about 4 times. 5 out of 10. God Tamer, the Trial of the Fool made me angry, 4 out of 10. Soul Master. This title is very misleading. I don't see him playing the saxophone or anything. 5 out of 10. Dung Defender. Some say he got a massive downgrade from when he was a White Defender, but I don't think the White Defender was all that great to begin with. 4 out of 10 for the Dung Defender and 5 out of 10 for the White Defender. Great Nail Sage Sly. It's interesting to see that Sly, the shopkeep, ended up being the Great Nail Sage, but it's a good fight and it's a funny reveal. 7 out of 10. Hornet. I'm going to be waiting until it's out to talk about her extensively. And that was it for this part of the section. There are going to be some spoilers in this next part, so if you haven't played the game and you care about the story in your games, here's your warning. Broken Vessel. Although this fight is pretty easy, I find the background behind this character to be very interesting. This is mostly just because of how mysterious the background in question is. As the name of the boss implies, it's a broken vessel, one of many vessels who had escaped the abyss, and one whose carcass is overtaken by the infection. My question is, how did the vessel get here in the first place? This was one of the 2 bosses who made me question how the vessels escaped, this including the knight. The gate to the abyss was closed after the Pale King had selected the Hollow Knight, so how did this happen? If I'm being honest, I don't really know how it happened, and this seems to be a question that has bothered the Hollow Knight community for quite some time now. As far as I'm aware, even Team Cherry doesn't know how this happened. Something else I find to be interesting about this boss is that he reaches out to the knight when he's defeated. This is also something that made me question the nature of this boss, and as such the vessels in general. Although overtaken by the infection during the entire fight, at the very end you see the final remaining shred of life that this vessel had. Even more interesting than this is the dream variant of this boss known as Lost Kin. This boss is accessed by dream nailing the carcass of the lost vessel. The dream nail in Hollow Knight is an ability that allows you to collect essence, enter the dreams of bugs, and let you see dialogue that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. Anyway, not only is this version of the boss harder, but it has an interesting scene right after the fight. When you return to Hallow Nest, upon interacting with the Lost Kin bows to the knight. This is extremely interesting to me and is ultimately up to interpretation. I simply see this to be the Lost Kin accepting that their being has come to an end through the superior abilities of their sibling. I think it's a pretty meaningful scene, as in addition to being something that you can make theories about, it gives you a peek into the true nature of the vessels. Despite their purpose being that of being hollow, they do seem to have some sort of will or emotion, even if it's a small amount. I give the Broken Vessel / Lost Kin boss fight a 6.5 out of 10. Paintmaster Shio. He left the art of nail fighting to pursue the art of art. While you were out here playing with your silly nail, this guy was studying the brush. I really like Shio's fight. It's not just a bit challenging, it's also really fun. Not only are the attacks created for being pain, where many other bosses in this game can be infuriating, this fight is just enough to have you die a couple times, but also not make you want to throw your controller through the screen. Paintmaster Shio gets a 7 out of 10. The Collector. This guy's fight isn't that great, he just hops around and throws enemies at you, not very interesting. What I do find to be interesting though is that there's a mold in an area known as the White Palace that seems to take the same shape as the Collector. This seems to hint that the creation of the Collector was through the Pale King. This though does definitely bring about a fair amount of questions. Did the Pale King let the Collector go, or did it escape? What motivation did the Collector have to leave the White Palace? What was their purpose? Where did their obsession of bugs and grubs originate from? Did they really accidentally mess with my Popeye's order, or did they do that on purpose? Because I know I had a bit of a bad day that day and I was a bit rude, but that doesn't mean that I should have found that many toenails in my biscuit. My theory is that the Collector was one of the first experiments that the Pale King had with Void, with the intention of turning it into what we now know as the King's Molds. It's a common theory, but it's still kind of interesting to think about the other possibilities, even if they may be far-fetched. Collector gets a 5 out of 10. Grim. So, I beat Grim on my second try, but his Nightmare King variant. It's difficult. Look, to give you perspective on this, it's easier to find somebody who's funny on Reddit than it is to fight this boss and win. I think Nightmare King Grim was the sole reason that my save file went from 95 hours to 98 hours of playtime. There are positives though. The arena you fight him in is pretty cool, and his attacks are really creative. I mean, he turns into a pufferfish despite being what I can only assume to be the bug version of a vampire. Despite being very difficult, this fight is pretty fun. Although I did lose 3 hours of my life to one boss, but I did get the upgraded Grimchild, so I'd say it was worth it. 7 out of 10 for a regular Grim and 8.5 out of 10 for Nightmare King Grim. The Mantis Lords. I really like this boss fight, especially when you're forced to fight multiple Mantis Lords at once. It can get really hectic. To see part of why I like this boss so much though, we're gonna have to look into the lore of another boss as well. Okay, we don't have to, but I thought it would be cool. I mean, what else am I going to talk about? The Gallium Disappearing Spoon mold, create a magic disappearing / bending / melting Gallium spoon, includes syringe for only $49? Well, actually, let's start off with the Mantis Lords in general. They are, of course, the leaders of the Mantis tribe in Hallownest, this being due to their immense physical prowess, with superiority in physical combat being highly respected within the Mantis culture. For much time within the Mantis tribe, there was peace. There was even a treaty with the Pale King that allowed for the Mantis tribe to stay separate from the Kingdom of Hallownest on the condition that they would defend Hallownest from the bugs of Deepness. After the infection came along though, there was a divide between the Mantis Lords. 3 of them wished to continue their established way of life, but one wanted to become stronger. He was willing to give in to the infection for power, eventually turning his back on his 3 sisters to do so. As is evident by some of the enemies in Queen's Garden, there were many Mantises who followed him for the same reason. The turned Mantis Lord is known in-game as the Traitor Lord, and although you can tell that his plan kind of worked, taking off 2 masks instead of 1, he has succumbed to the infection. And for what? Power. Mantis Lords get an 8 out of 10, and the Traitor Lord gets a 5 out of 10. Nosk. I don't know why, but everyone seems to have a distaste for Nosk. I mean, sure, he's an easy boss, but he looks cool as heck, man. And the mystery behind this guy is pretty much unmatched by any other character or boss in this game. I mean, even ELDERBUG has more established lore. Anyway, the first time that you see Nosk, he looks just like the Knight, and it gets even more interesting from there. Not only does Nosk appear to be a shapeshifter, but it seems as though he's being affected by the infection in some way, this being indicated by the orange blob that you can see on him. The true nature of Nosk is really shrouded in mystery. The whole thing just leaves so much up to interpretation. I wish we knew more about this guy, but unfortunately we just don't have enough information. Not even enough to craft solid theories. He does get wings when he's attuned by the Godmasters though, so that makes things a little less confusing. All of the currently known lore of Nosk I will now be quoting from the Hollow Knight fan wiki. Nosk is a mysterious, shape-shifting infected beast hunting throughout Deepness. It can mimic the shape of faces it finds in the memories of bugs, usually loved or departed ones, and contort its body to assume the smaller frame of its lures. It hangs its prey from the ceiling within its lair at the bottom of Deepness, including dirt carvers, a stalking devout, just one. He may be a beast, but he's not a monster, and various vessels. Nosk is one of only 3 known infected creatures with no thoughts from the Dreamnail, the others being the Broken Vessel and the Shadow Creeper. Seeing as though he resides in Deepness, the only real theory that I can come up with for his origins is that Nosk is an evolution of the spiders that inhabit the area or something. He would then supposedly be overtaken by the infection and inherit some sort of power from it. This is something that can be seen with other enemies throughout the game, especially so in the Forgotten Crossroads when the infection is at its height, although admittedly this is as such to a much lower degree than what I'm implying. It's a really shaky idea, but it's honestly the best that I can come up with the information that I have at my disposal, at least as such without the theory being boring. An explanation that would make much more sense would be that Nosk was already a shapeshifter and his powers were heightened by the infection to some degree. Although this is much more likely the case for Nosk, due to the ambiguity of his background, I thought, why not make a theory that probably won't hold up so that I can entertain an idea while not in the realm of plausibility is enough to get some gears turning. Nosk gets a 7.5 out of 10. The Hollow Knight. So everyone knows that this boss is kind of underwhelming. This though is probably done so by design, as the vessel had probably undergone some sort of corrosion at the hand of the infection, the purity of their hollow nature being tarnished by an idea instilled. This is further supported by the pure vessel boss fight, which is much harder and one that I actually haven't completed as of yet because I haven't been able to complete the Pantheon of Hallowness, so right now I'm just going off of what I've been able to deduce from what I've seen. The Hollow Knight was not hollow enough to contain the Radiance, and this causes the infection to leak out. This was supposedly due to the bond that the Hollow Knight had with the Pale King, that idea instilled that I referred to earlier. It's actually kinda sad. The Pale King is a pretty terrible dad though. I mean, your kid might choke on one of those buzzsaws that you were leaving around the house. 7 out of 10 for the Hollow Knight, and I'm not quite sure as I didn't fight him, out of 10 for the Pure Vessel. The Radiance. This is actually the true end boss of Hollow Knight. It's the cause of the infection that I've mentioned multiple times throughout this video and ultimate antagonist of the game. Because, as Mossback puts it, mods are assholes.
Now, as we all know, moths in real life are just complete assholes. So yeah, mods are assholes in this game too.
This boss's attacks and phases are unlike any other in the game. Not only are the attacks pretty unique with barely any actually coming from the boss itself with the exception of the beam attacks, the fight is pretty difficult and fairly enjoyable. On the lore front though, I'll try to summarize it as best as I possibly can as there's quite a bit of it. So Big Moth shows up in Hallowness and makes more moths come from their light. This creates a moth tribe. Moth tribe sees Pale King and they say, "You got that tasty taste." And so they leave the Big Moth. Eventually everyone forgets about Big Moth, but then they don't. Actually, a lot of people start to not forget about Big Moth. This made bugs bend to Big Moth's will because the dreams of them made their minds go, "No." Pastry Royal Boy then says, "Bro, we gotta do something about this moth dude. They're making our people go full Instagram comedian." Mr. White King Man then gets the Hollow Knight, but for some stupid reason is nice to it and as such makes it have feelings, therefore making it unhollow. Despite this, they put the Big Moth into the Hollow Knight, but it doesn't work. Who could have predicted that happening? The infection starts to leak out and tries to make the bugs go wacky. This calls the Knight back to Hallowness and puts the events of the game into action. If you want a more in-depth version of the Radiance's lore, I recommend checking out the fan wiki. In fact, if you want lore for the game in general, I recommend checking it out. It's a pretty good source and one that I used a fair amount for this video. My only question about this boss is how it appeared in the first place, but I'll just assume that it came from the light, whatever that means. Radiance gets a 7 out of 10. The Massive Moss Charger. He runs at you. 11 out of 10. I mean, even the God Seekers like this guy. He's the best boss in the game. That's it. He's the best boss in the game. We found him, boys. The best boss. He's got so many things going for him. He's green. He's massive. He's green. Yes. Okay, that's it for the bosses. That took way longer than it should have, but it was also shorter than it could have been. So, you should thank my teeth.
Well, Miss Gardina.
I really did try to find stuff to criticize about this game, but I actually had a hard time finding things to talk about in all honesty. I personally find the beginning of the game to be a bit slower than I would like, but this is picked up quite quickly when you get the dash ability. Stag stations are a bit few and far between. Additionally, I don't think there's much replay value aside from doing a Steel Soul playthrough. This is just because after you've extensively explored the world the first time, you've kind of seen it all. Nothing really changes between playthroughs, which makes things a bit uninteresting the second time around. All the the enemies even have the same position for each screen every time. I've been told that these sorts of things are common in Metroidvanias, but as someone who's not accustomed to the genre, these are just some things that I thought stuck out. The last thing I'll complain about is, while the Hive as an area is a pretty great concept, it felt a bit underdeveloped. It's disappointing because the area shows so much promise with creative enemies and an amazing environment, but unfortunately it just isn't as good as it could have very well been. As for what good things I have to say about the game though, the controls are good, the world is great, the music is amazing, the characters are well written, the story is interesting, the animation is astounding, the bosses are difficult but fun, there are so many enemies, the game just makes me want to explore every inch of the world. It's one of the best video game experiences that I've had in a long time. I know in complimenting the game I said a lot of things that were really broad, but honestly I can't really describe it any other way. A lot of these attributes that the game possesses need to be experienced rather than told. This game is amazing and it's a must play for anybody who has any sort of interest in video games. I mean, the game is only $15 for a digital copy. You have to play this game, and if you don't, I'm going to come to your city and mess up your Popeyes order. A solid 9 out of 10. I apologize for this video not coming out sooner. As you can see, it's much longer than what I've made previously, and not only that, I was also being lazy and watching The Office in its entirety instead of working on the video. The thing is though, I don't want all of the time that I wasted to be for nothing, so I'm also going to be giving a brief review of The Office. It was... okay. I think part of the reason that I didn't absolutely fall in love with the show, as many others have, is because the people around me who would watch the show would always hype it up to be this end-all be-all to comedy. Things like, it's the best comedy show ever. Once you watch this show, you'll never be able to look at comedy the same way again. It's so funny that when you're laughing, you'll unhinge your jaw to the point in which you'll become a black hole and engulf everything around you. The kind of stuff you hear all the time. It was a good show, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not the best comedy that has ever aired on television. Actually, Clone High, which is also a show that I've watched very recently, made me laugh much more than The Office did, if I'm being entirely honest.
What's that word? Feelings?
This may very well be due to my taste in comedy though. I often more so enjoy things like stand-up, sketch comedy, and the May. This isn't to say that The Office doesn't have its positives though. It does indeed have a fair amount of good jokes. Much of the comedy has to do with the escalation of events in a given situation. This build-up can make for some pretty good jokes, but some did fall flat in my opinion, as my anticipation for a good payoff would sometimes be met with one that was less than satisfactory to me. Thankfully though, this is something that doesn't happen a majority of the time. I also really like how they make full use of the mockumentary aspect of the show, having the cameraman be an actual person in the show, and as such having us view the shenanigans of The Office as if we the viewer were there as well. The characters were also very well written. Although many of these characters are caricatures of personalities that we may know from our own lives, they're definitely written in a believable enough way that makes it so that we overlook the absurd situations that sprout from the interactions that they have with one another. The story is fine. The premises are fairly simple in concept, but they're still able to be engaging enough to make you ask that question that many TV shows strive to make you ask. This question being simply, what happens next? The show dropped off in quality a bit after Michael left, but that's something that's been thoroughly established on the internet as a fact of life. In fact, I skipped a lot of episodes in seasons 8 and 9 just because I wasn't enjoying the show. If I'm being entirely honest though, I went into The Office for the comedy, and as such, I feel as though I can't really speak on too much else, as my opinions on most other aspects other than those of which I've touched on are not fully formed or educated. Even some aspects of the show which I have touched on, I don't have fully formed opinions on. With what information I do have surrounding The Office though, my personal rating of the show would be a 7.5 out of 10. So what is the moral of this video? I guess it's that you should absolutely play Hollow Knight, and The Office is fairly good. And with that, I just want to remind you that brownies and Reese's are the only dessert, and if you object to this fact, then you will be sent into the sun. Goodbye and have fun melting.